First, let's look at the sailboat footage I took at Forest Beach recently. Notice how the sail mirrors into itself and oscillates in between both. The sail looks like it's coming right down to the waterline, or what we think is the waterline. It gives the false appearance of being obstructed down behind the curve. As you can see in the infrared footage, this is clearly not the case. This oscillation between coming down to the waterline and inferior miraging is very important to understand. When we see ships bottom up, disappearing over the horizon, this is what is actually occurring. Okay, now on to Soundly's footage. You're looking at the latest offering from Soundly. Before I begin, I like Soundly, I really do. He does his own observations, he puts in hard work, and I respect him a lot for that. I just think he is confused by what he is seeing. It's just an education issue, is how I see it. So this one is a superb still because it shows the tallest buildings all the way to the waterline, or what Soundly thinks is the waterline. Then we see the smaller buildings have a gap underneath them. Why is that gap happening is what Soundly should be asking. Instead of just jumping straight to, it must be Earth curvature. What's happening here is the small buildings are mirroring, and the tallest buildings are mirroring down into themselves. But they are not being cut off. Where the mirroring is occurring is where the bottoms of the buildings should be. It's actually easy to understand as soon as you open your mind to something other than curvature. If we film over calm, motionless water, this effect basically disappears. So the key is to film over really calm water and compare it to the footage you get from rougher water. The most popular comment I get from Globers is that this small band of mirroring can't account for 90 feet of obstruction. Oh yes it can. Estimate how much of the buildings the yellow band on the screen could be obstructing. Remember, the buildings are getting smaller and smaller due to perspective. If the buildings were right in front of you, then sure, maybe I'd accept that excuse. But these buildings are 40 kilometers away. You know how your thumb can cover the whole moon? Well, a small band of mirroring on top of the water can easily cover 90 feet or 30 meters of the buildings at 40 kilometers away. So if this band of mirroring was removed, the bottoms of the buildings that are above the 6 meter levee surrounding Lake Pontchartrain would become visible. So Soundly, if you're able to film Lake Pontchartrain when the water is really calm and motionless and on a very low wind day and low humidity, you'll get footage that looks different to what you have filmed here. So what I've found is that for long distance observations, you can't expect to identify things like exact parts of a building. The distortion is just too great at that distance. This next shot is also great because the band of mirroring on the sailboat will only cover a meter or so because it's close to us. But for the buildings 40 kilometers away that are much smaller due to perspective, you can see that this small band of mirroring will obstruct much more of the buildings. Another really great bit of footage Soundly has kindly supplied us is the elevator footage done with a drone. You probably haven't looked carefully at this footage before, but trust me, it's gold for proving the band of mirroring that is occurring. I've stepped through the footage playing it back and forth using the full stop and comma keys on the keyboard. As the arrows appear, take a careful look at the objects disappearing over the water line. That's right, I said above the water line. The water is not obscuring anything. But Soundly says the water bulge is obscuring the buildings. No, it's not. It's the band of mirroring above the water surface that is doing the obstructing, and his own footage proves it. Take a careful look at the Superdome roof. Parts of it are disappearing as the band of mirroring hits it. Nothing to do with the water. It is the band of mirroring that is doing this. Thanks again, Soundly, for proving this. Alright, watch other parts of the skyline and the bridge, for example, as we toggle back and forth, and it becomes really clear what is actually happening. The band of mirroring and distortion is causing the obstruction. None of those buildings are being obstructed underneath the water line. As a side note, if you watch the Superdome disappearing in the band of mirroring, it reminds me a lot of how Wide Awake filmed the sun disappearing into the distortion. Something to think about. Does the sun actually set, or is it disappearing into this layer of distortion? Something I plan on filming more coming up with the infrared camera. Alright, let's look at the next bit of footage. Look at how much of the buildings can be obstructed by this band of mirroring and distortion. 30 meters or 90 foot is impossible, says Soundly. Well, you decide for yourself. It's certainly a lot more than 1 meter, put it that way. Alright, if we overlay the bottom of the building, we can clearly see that what Soundly thought was curvature is simply just the obstruction of the band of mirroring and distortion we see above the water surface. As we toggle through it, you can see that the obstruction is simply the distortion, and the bottoms of the buildings will easily fit into this section. However, I think the most interesting footage Soundly has done is the elevator drone footage of the Marriott Hotel. As we go back and forth in the frames, again notice the objects disappearing above the water line. Nothing is disappearing below the water line. It is not the bulge of the water causing the disappearing. It is the band of distortion and obstruction. Again, we see this band of mirroring and distortion obstructing the objects above the water line. But what fascinates me the most about this footage is how high above the water the camera is. At a guess, the camera is about 40 meters or so above the water surface here. Yet we clearly see objects being obstructed by the band of mirroring. No object in this footage is obstructed below the water line. All of the obstruction is occurring above the water line. I find it fascinating that even at 40 meters elevation, we still see subjects obscured by this. Now, I haven't done much drone footage like this, so my guess is that the humidity and atmospheric effects around New Orleans are probably pretty high and quite a lot higher than other places. Maybe a New Orleans resident can fill me in a bit better on this. But for objects to be obstructed above the waterline at 40 meters elevation, man, that is some serious distortion. Alright, thanks for watching. Try to have an open mind for new information. It won't kill you, but it may make you stronger.